Well, good evening. Tonight we are featuring Mr. Joe Bailey. We are very pleased to have you here, Joe. Thank you very much.
Thanks for good to be here.
Joe is a long-time experienced coach from the principles. He's done loads and loads of work. He's written over 7 books on the subject of the principles. He was trained as a psychologist, full-scale psychologist, and found and discovered the principles in his early years, I think, if I remember correctly. And it's wonderful to have you here tonight in
Thank
our
you.
program for the
Um,
3P pioneers.
so, how would you like to proceed? Would you like to interview me or
What we would
say a few words?
love to hear from you is how you discovered the principles, how it worked for you, and well,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So, um, I think I knew from fairly early on in my life, as an adolescent, I had the opportunity to work to be an exchange student in Guatemala in Central America. And my aunt lived there and was a did a lot of work with the poor and was a Catholic nun. And it was during that summer I discovered my calling was I really wanted to just help people and alleviate suffering in the world. And eventually that led me, of course, as a kid growing up in a Catholic family. Uh, I thought I should become a priest, but that didn't work out so well for me. So I eventually got into the field of psychology and majored in that and went to graduate school, got my degree, and I was so excited that I could finally really help alleviate suffering and help people. But all I really learned in my traditional clinical psychology training was more about diagnosing people, giving them labels, doing them lots of testing. We did learn a little bit about therapy, but it was all about fixing symptoms and problems, symptom alleviation. But that was the state of the art. And I studied with some of the best people in America in the field: Virginia Satir, a very famous family therapist; Milton Erickson, famous hypnotist. So I had really good training, and I had a pretty successful practice going in my 20s. But by the time I was in my early 30s, I was burning out. I was seeing the same clients over and over again. They'd keep coming back with, it was almost like a cafeteria plate. You'd take one problem off and another one would emerge. You take that one off and another one would emerge. And then the old one would come back. And so it was always treating the problem and the symptoms rather than uh, helping people discover their mental health, their resilience, the inner voice of wisdom and clarity and natural self-esteem. And we talked a lot about it. We talked about the fringes of it, but we didn't have the principles. So I was actually fantasizing about quitting being a therapist. I just thought, I'm making a good living, but am I helping anybody? I don't think so. It just seemed like it was just a revolving door. So my dear friend, Dr. Keith Blevins, kept sending me these Sydney Banks tapes. And by that time, I had tried everything from meditation and yoga and Eastern philosophies. And, I was exploring and I thought, oh, here, another California latest fad. And I would discard it into the wastebasket. So I went through a lot of Sid Banks tapes, but I never heard any of them. But one day, when I was 31 years old, he called again. He didn't give up on me. He was my best friend. And he said, Sydney Banks is going to speak at the University of Miami Medical School. Why don't you come down and hear him? And it was winter in Minnesota and it was Miami, so there was beaches and palm trees. I said, well, that was enough to get me to go. And he said, and by the way, there's this woman we'd really like you to meet. And by that time I was divorced and I was dating and looking for the perfect woman to fall in love with, and so that was another added incentive for me to go to Florida and meet Sydney Banks and this woman. And so I went to Florida, and 4 hours before I met Sydney Banks, I met my wife, who's I've been married to now for 40 years. So I met Michael, and we fell in love that day. And it was love at first sight, luckily for both of us. And so I didn't know what happened to me. And so then that night, we had a dinner party, and at that dinner, Sydney Banks was there, and Roger Mills, and Rick Suarez, and Keith Blevins, and many of the early pioneers in this psychology. And so I'm just sitting there, and all of a sudden, everybody gets really quiet, and Sid starts to speak. And I don't know what is going on here. Why is everybody being quiet? I didn't know what I'd gotten myself into. But everything that Sid said, it in my heart, in my wisdom, I felt was absolutely true. But everything he said was contrary to the thought system that I had so with great difficulty constructed about how the human mind worked and what was necessary for people to get well, etc. And so it was, I was in a lot of conflict as I heard him, because it was collapsing my whole belief system. So my ego wanted to run out of the room. My true self, my heart, was drawn to every word. It was like, wow, finally someone understands. But my intellect couldn't comprehend it. So it was a very uncomfortable first encounter with Sydney Banks. But I was falling in love, and so that kind of was enough to keep me in there. And I went and heard Sid, and again, I had the same reaction. I felt as though I was listening to absolute truth. My truth meter, which I trusted, was setting off all the alarms of yes, and my intellect was fighting it. So this is a common thing for trained professionals when they encounter Sid. But life tricked me, and I fell in love with Michael, and in a few months she moved to Minnesota, where I lived. And I was just building a brand new home, and we moved in the new home together. And we've been married for ever since then. But I wasn't quite sure what to do, and because in my practice I had a partner, and she didn't know what to do with me, because clearly something had happened to me. And she was kind of threatened by it, but she said, we should talk to our supervisor, Dr. Carl Whitaker, who was a famous psychiatrist. So we met with him, and after listening to me for a while, he said, you know, I don't think you two can work together anymore. Joe's had a paradigm shift. Those were his words. And he sent me Kuhn's book on paradigm shifts and said, read this book. I think you're in a paradigm shift. And so we parted our ways. We were very good friends still, but we were working from a different set of assumptions. And I didn't really know how to take what Sid was saying and put it into a psychotherapy model. There was no books on it. There was no trainings in it. There was nothing. And so I just flew by the seat of my pants. And I would say things to my clients, and they would look at me, you know, like a dog with a cocked head. And they'd say, wow, that was really helpful. Thank you. Oh boy, and they would get hopeful, and they would come back the next week, and they say, wow, everything has changed for me. And I'd say, well, what did I tell you? Because I was just speaking from the heart, from my little bit of insight that I'd had about my own life. But the results were profound with my clients. And so it was my clients actually that convinced me of the power of the principles. my own head wouldn't do it. It didn't make it still didn't make sense to me, but I was starting to have the experience of having a thought experience of anxiety or stress or fear or regret. And it was almost like it was another periscope back here, and I would see what I was doing with the power of thought. And I'd realize, oh, I'm just having a thought experience. It's not happening. And then my mind would clear, and then I would see life more clearly. I would be more in the moment. My stress would go and my body would relax. I would like go into a state of meditation without meditating. So I knew I was on to something. But our practice ended, but my practice exploded. All of a sudden at first my clients were getting well, so I thought, oh, this isn't a very good economic model. We're all my clients, but then they would tell their friends and their family, and pretty soon my practice was exploding. And so I brought Dr. Roger Mills up to the University of Minnesota to speak, and I invited all my colleagues, and about 150 people came. And most of them didn't like it at all, didn't want to have anything to do with it. One person, Christine Heath, who was the last person I thought would hear anything, was transformed. So she and I quit our clinic. She was the administrative director. I was just one of the therapists, a private practice system. And we started the Minneapolis Institute of Mental Health. And we had that organization along with the Hawaii Counseling and Education Center, because Chris later moved to Hawaii. And we treated thousands of patients of every diagnosis. We started working with school systems. We started working with businesses, and it just grew from there and really had a big impact on our community. And so that was the beginning. That's how, kind of a long answer, Schwer, but that's how it began.
It's great. How long did you take before you started to include the understanding of the principles from SIT itself? Because in the beginning you said, well, I heard something, I felt something, something triggered me, and I use it. But did you also go and see Sid later on to to hear his views and so on?
Well, it was maybe he heard about that Chris and I had started this institute, so he became our consultant. And every week he would meet with the staff. He was our trainer. So we didn't not just listen to Sid's tapes. He would come to Minnesota. We would host him to do conferences many times, and and he would work with our staff. We would talk with him on the phone weekly. He would consult with us, and so we got the source. He was our trainer, basically. Now, he knew nothing about psychology or mental health, but he would just speak to us about the principles and about, where we were caught up in a belief system. He was really doing therapy with us, even though he wouldn't have called it that. And so we began to get more grounding and deeper in it. And as we got deeper in it, there was no language to this in the beginning. There was no concepts or ways of talking about it. It was just all from the heart, which was really good, actually. And when we tried to put a form to it, it kind of messed it up. For a while, we had asked the president of the American Psychological Association to come to one of our conferences and help us see how to bring this into the mainstream of psychology. And he was a positive psychology, the leader of that field.
Yeah.
And he said, well, you need to have core concepts, and you need to have curriculums and, certification programs and all that. So we did that for a while. but we got in our heads about it. It went from inspiration to conceptualization, and we started to lose the feeling. So it didn't take too long before Sid said, you know, you guys are really off track here. This is, you can't put this in a bottle. You can't contain it. It has to be, you have to speak from the heart, speak from that feeling of wisdom, and it will guide you. But as soon as you try to organize it into a conceptual framework, this isn't from the intellect. This is from the invisible intelligence of mind. And when you're operating from universal mind, wisdom, insight in the moment, you'll have impact. As soon as you turn it into a form, you'll lose the electricity, you'll lose the power behind it. So that was a painful lesson
It's so
for
important.
us to learn.
Yeah, but it's so important. Absolutely, it's so important because we have to understand this comes from your heart. It doesn't come from a concept.
Yeah.
And I've taken a lot of trouble to get a hold of George Prensky's book he wrote for his doctorate. And because I wanted to find out why Sid was so against that. Sid was quite against that book. And he, I think as a result of the fact that Sid didn't like the book, I tried to find out what's going on there. And then I started reading the book and I said, oh yeah, but this is conceptualizing. This is bringing it into your head, and it's not, it's you're losing the heart relationship.
Yeah.
Let's call it that way. And it's so
I
important.
remember when I wrote my first book, Schwer,
Mhm.
I never thought I would ever write a book.
Mhm.
Number one, I didn't like to write. But I was giving a talk with Mavis Karn
Mhm.
about the principles of serenity because we were working with Hazelton, which is the first inpatient treatment center for alcoholism in America.
Mhm.
And the staff of the women's program that we were consulting with, their burnout was going away. Their impact with the patients was accelerating. So we were doing training with them. And at one of the talks, a publisher came up to me after the talk that Mavis and I gave, and he said, Joe, you need to write a book about this. And I said, no, I don't write. Don't tell me to write. And he said, no, your ideas are really powerful and fresh, and the world needs this. You need to write a book. And so I wrote the book, The Serenity Principle, after much consternation and getting over doing it with my head like I'd been taught in grad school, and just writing from the heart.
Mhm.
And when I'd write from the heart, it just flowed, and it was just beautiful. You know, it needed editing for sure, but I wrote the book. And then so Hazelden had a big publishing arrangement with HarperCollins, and so they had a big they published hundreds of books.
Mhm.
And they got wind of it, and they told me that when I was giving a talk at the state convention for addiction counselors, they gave me a check for thousands of dollars and a contract and said, we heard you're writing this book and we want to publish it.
Okay.
And I said, wow, are you kidding me? I said, well, this could be very controversial because Hazelden is very 12-step, Alcoholics Anonymous oriented.
Yeah.
So before the book came out, I met with Dr. Anderson, the founder of Hazelden, and said, I told him, I said, I thought I better meet with you because this could be very controversial. And he said, didn't you get my letter? And I said, no. And he says, well, I sent you a letter this week saying that we're not going to publish your book. We sent it out to all of our counselors, and 40 of our counselors said they would quit Hazelden if they published your book. So this is what happens when you speak the truth. So I said, what? It's supposed to come out in 3 weeks. And he says, I said, well, what did you think? And he said, I loved your book. It's 20 years ahead of its time. I said, okay. So I didn't know. So I called the guy who had originally asked me to write the book, and this is how life works. In the meantime, his little publishing company in Minneapolis got bought out by HarperCollins, the largest publisher in the world.
Mm.
And he was now living in San Francisco as the editor-in-chief of Harper, the psychology division.
Oh, wow.
So I called him and told him what happened, and he said, no problem. We'll publish it. We love controversy. So this is, right now I'm writing a book called My Magic Carpet Ride, because that's the way it's gone. It's been, and this is back to our original point where I jumped off on this tangent, that anytime I went into the intellectual explanation of the principles and veered away from in the moment inspirational connection to universal mind, it went awry. But the power of that universal intelligence has self-correction designed into it. So it self-corrected me and got me back on track. And whenever I veer off of that, because I'm human, and I do, we all do, we get caught up in our beliefs about it, and then we lose that conscious awareness of speaking from beyond what you know to the truth. So when I'm giving a talk or doing a therapy session, a coaching session, quite often it's almost like I mean, I know what I'm saying, but it's just coming through me rather than from me, is the best way to describe it. And I'm learning as much from what I'm saying as my clients are usually. I'll say, wow, that really is true. I need to hear that. You know, so when you're operating from insight and wisdom, our direct connection to mind, universal mind, it I mean, it is you, it is your personality, it is your language, it is your stories, your style. It's all you, but it's you without the ego.
Yeah.
Taking credit, trying to convince. But you know, I go in and out of that, just like every other coach, therapist. You know, we can lose our way thinking that we know something, and we've stored it.
Yeah.
But for me, it's been a journey of constantly letting go of what I thought I know from the past and rediscovering in the moment, whether it's doing a coaching session or giving a talk or writing a book or working with a company or with a hospital system. It's a magic carpet ride. There's no steering wheel. It's taking you on a journey that is inspired, all-knowing, and always surprising.
Absolutely. Yeah. I so agree with you. It's wonderful. It's amazing what happens sometimes, and it never stops to astonish you with what's coming up now. I had an amazing meeting last week with a young lady who's been diagnosed with autism 5 years ago or so. And when she came to me, I said, I don't believe it. I don't believe you have autism. You told me you've had a difficult youth, but I don't believe you have autism. And last week she came back and she said, you know, something strange happened to me. I've never had fears of heights. And now I was in Kuala Lumpur on a mountain. I was scared. I am experiencing emotions, which I've never had. What's going on? So well, my jaw fell onto my knees almost.
Yeah.
I said, my God, you're letting your emotions back in.
Hmm.
That's so amazing. And I don't know what I did.
Well, you freed her from her label,
Yeah, probably. Yeah,
you know?
yeah,
It was like a head cocker where you go, oh, maybe I'm not my illness.
yeah.
You know, when I got Lyme disease,
Hmm.
I tell that story in this
Yeah,
book.
yeah.
Um, you know, I was very sick. You know, my joints ached. I had no energy. I couldn't think. I felt depressed, and it felt physical.
Hmm.
And I went to the doctor, and they said, "You've got the worst case of Lyme disease we've ever seen," and blah blah blah. And you need to go to a specialist. And they sent me on my way to that. The first thing the doctor said is the most important thing in helping you with Lyme disease is your mind. And I remembered that. But then I got all caught up in all the supplements and all the things, and I created a whole thought system about Lyme disease.
Hmm.
And so I would get better, but I never got well. And if you haven't heard the story, I'll just tell it real briefly. So my wife and I, we study Kung Fu. And so we were in Malaysia, and we were attending a conference there. And one of the um, instructors was from Switzerland, uh, and he was a healer in Qigong healing. And so I wanted to get a session with him about my Lyme. My Lyme. Did you hear that?
You're alive.
Yeah. And so we were in Chinatown in Penang, and the streets were really busy, and everything was just loud. And I caught up with uh, with Andrew, and I said, Andrew, and he says, yes. What is it? I said, I'd like to get a session with you. And he says, let's just do it now. And I said, now? It was just horns honking, motorcycles, and everything. He says, yeah, now. What's the problem? I said, well, last summer I got Lyme disease. And he stopped me and he said, don't ever say you have Lyme disease again. I said, but I have Lyme disease. That's what I have been diagnosed with. And he said, every time you say that, your mind sends a signal to every cell in your body that, and every piece of information and data you ever read about Lyme disease, it's telling the cells what to experience, and it's keeping you sick. Oh, I believe that. I've written books about that. No ego here. He says, no, you don't. You don't believe me. I said, well, how can you say that? And he says, well, I can see it in your face. You don't believe me. And I was kind of insulted. And so he goes on and talks more about the quantum field and blah, blah, blah. And I'm listening, and all of a sudden I heard him. And in that moment, I heard him, and I could just see all the thinking I was doing about Lyme disease. I had a whole program running in my head unconsciously about talking to this professional, reading that article on the internet, or this or that or the other, reinforcing my identity as a Lyme patient. And he looked at me and says, now you believe me. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, I can see it in your face. You just saw it. And I said, okay, can we have that session? He said, you just had it. You're done. I said, you're kidding.
It's a wonderful story.
5-minute therapy? So I didn't know what hit me. So I went back to my apartment, and I fell asleep into a deep sleep. And the next morning I woke up early, and I had all this energy. And I went down to the swimming pool, and I just started swimming, and I just did lap after lap after. I had all this energy. And then I went to the weight room, and I doubled my weights, and I could lift them. And and so I didn't know what had happened to me. So a friend who lived in Penang, we were going to get together for lunch. I went up to her apartment, and she looked at me when I walked in the door, and she just like turned white, and she said, "My God, what happened to you?" And I said, what? And she says, "You look 10 years younger than you did yesterday."
Wow.
So that was really powerful,
Yeah.
to say the least. Yeah, and then I began working a lot with people with chronic illnesses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Shweer, are we going along okay here? Is everything
We're
going
going
cool?
great. Yeah, and I would like to offer the other people who are in this call to ask their questions if you have any, because
Yeah, I'd love to hear your questions.
so go ahead, please, and ask any question you like. Just raise your hand, and I'll give you your chance to.
Berdian?
I had Lyme disease too,
Oh,
for 3 times after in another. And when I met, when I came into the principles, I really understood I didn't have it. And then I recognized I was laying here on the couch, and then I was thinking, oh yeah, I'm sick. Huh? I'm sick. So I was constantly remembering the disease. And most of the time, I really didn't feel anything. And it's very nice to hear from you the same story, but because it recognized me again,
Yeah.
what's here as well.
yeah.
So thank you. Yeah.
It's very, very humbling, isn't it? You know, you think like no one ever really gets the principles. The principles are a moment-to-moment experience.
Yeah.
So as soon as you conceptualize and you think you have it, you're limiting the power of mind. And that's the as a, you know, I'm a nice guy, you know, I really love people, I really care about people, I want to help them, but I'm human, and so there's a propensity for us to try to create a container for our insights. And so it's innocent. It's so innocent when you do that or I do that, because I can do it. I can still do that. I can still create a pattern of belief and thought and fall trap to seeing life through that lens. But my feelings are there as a guidance system to wake me up when I've lost my humility, when I've lost my true joy, when I've lost my, I don't know, just awe of life. That's a clue to me that I've put it in a container again. And so but life is designed perfectly. Wisdom is designed perfectly to wake us up. So we'll have another smack. We'll have another, life is like Sid always said, life is a contact sport. A year ago, I found out that my wife and I both we were living in a house that had mold, and we were getting symptoms. And we found out that through blood testing, that our bodies were full of mold. The normal level was 5.34. We were like 500 and something parts per whatever in our blood. And so our doctor said, you have to move out of your house. You can't live there anymore. So we're living in a rental house now. We've demolished our home and we're rebuilding. But it was another year of discovery of the depth of the principles through illness once again. But there's no end to the depth of the understanding of the principles. And the way I see the universal guidance, or you could call it the divine spiritual guidance of life, is that we run into obstacles, we run into issues, not as punishment, but as help to wake us up deeper, to the understanding of the nature of our experience. So when I have a challenge in life now, it's not like, oh no, why is this happening to me? Although I might do that for a while. It's pretty soon, pretty quickly, it's okay, what is there for me to see that I don't yet see? That open heart, open mind, that we're always in the moment, we're on the precipice of the now. And we can innocently, insidiously create an illusion again. Mm-hmm. That, oh, it's the mold that's making me. Why is this happening to me? Poor me, whatever. But when we embrace it, our common sense, so we did have to destroy our home. We are rebuilding our home. There were consequences to that. But resilience is the capacity to have new thinking no matter the circumstance, to bounce back to your health. So as we go through the challenging times, which is why I wrote this book, Thriving in the Eye of the Hurricane, with the political division that we're experiencing in the world, with the war in Ukraine, with the COVID epidemic that was happening when I was writing this. There's all kinds of challenges in our world, but we're on the verge of this, like when the bubonic plague hit. It was prior to the Age of Enlightenment, the scientific revolution. So it's often during life's challenges that we have to go inside and go deeper and go to a higher level of consciousness. So that's what I want to write about in my book. I'm reflecting on now is just how there's this beautiful, still small voice within all of us that is guiding us back to health, back to wisdom, back to resilience. And when we run into a wall, it's not an obstacle, it's a redirection. It's a reawakening to a deeper understanding. So that's, for me, the infinite hope of the principles. No matter what we're going through, our forests are burning near us here. There's smoke in the air. It's 105 degrees Fahrenheit today where I live. Unprecedented temperatures. So the world is going through a time of change and transformation. And to me, the principles are the next evolutionary step for humanity. It is absolutely, if we don't learn the science of the mind, the power of mind, universal mind, to transform us, our families, our organizations, our businesses, our countries, the UN, etc., we will keep getting consequence. But as we awaken more deeply to wisdom, to our innate health, we will transform this world. We will transform the world. And I think the three principles is the bow of the ship. It's cutting that wave. And so I have a lot of hope.
Wow.
For me and for you and for everybody.
Wow. Thank you.
How are we doing on time, Shwar?
Well, we're doing fine. We've got 42 minutes. We've been talking over 40 minutes. I have Marcela who's in the waiting room or waiting for us. So
okay, great.
Please, Marcela, go ahead.
Hi, Joe. Hi, Sphere. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this great opportunity to talk with you, Joe. We met, I think, 2 years ago at Hertfeld. I remember your lovely sharings there.
Yeah. Okay.
And I, by the way, love the book, The Thriving in the Eye of Hurricane, and all
Oh,
the
thank you.
stories and those God stories and everything. So it's such a nice combination of stories where you just relate to the three principles through that, and then a little bit of explanation, which is also fine. So I really love that. And yeah, I just wanted to relate what you have just said. I have been recently, thanks to 3PGC, listening to that in-depth reading you did with Chris and Sandy
Oh,
Crot,
and Sandy Crot, yeah.
Second Chance. And
Mm.
there you also said something like, oh, when you get caught up again, it's not that you say, oh no, again, but rather to say, oh, aha, that's what's going on. I really love that.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so thank you for those really incentive words anytime, and kind and gentle kicks to us. And
Mm.
I'm curious, I wanted to ask about what you did maybe with Chris, if I understood it together, with schools. How did you work with schools? What did you do? School system.
Well, I didn't do a lot of that work directly. People on my staff, Jeff Tim and Darlene Jenks, and there were a few people on when we had a staff of about 16 therapists, and people found different interests. So some worked in business, some worked in the school systems, some worked in challenged communities of poverty. So there were people we were just making it up as we went along, and people would just get inspired in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But um, so basically, they talked a lot about the health of the helper. For teachers, they would help teachers to gain an understanding, because teaching can be a very challenging profession with behavioral disorders, and what's going on with children these days. And yeah, they always have had a challenge, but to help the teachers to see that health in the child, to see that innate wisdom, rather than trying to put into the child this wisdom. They would help bring it out of the child by seeing it in the child, encouraging it in the child. So the more that it's just like when I work with an alcoholic, I do a lot of work with addictions. I'm not looking at the illness. I'm understanding that they're addicted to drugs or whatever, and they may need medical help to detoxify but when I'm working with them, I'm working with that seed of health. It was interesting. There's one of the stories that just came to my mind just now through Universal Mind was I read about, this is in a National Geographic magazine, that they found in this urn in the pyramids these seeds of different plants, and so the scientists took these seeds, some of them, and planted them thousands of years later in soil and watered them in sunlight, and they grew after thousands of years of being dried up in a tomb in a pyramid. That seed is our essence, our true self in every human being. And when you water that seed with love and understanding, the understanding of how the mind works, with a feeling of unconditional love, it brings that child to life. They begin to see possibilities. They begin to feel loved. They begin to feel hopeful. And that feeling makes the mind open and curious, so they learn quickly. So when you nurture that seed of resilience in children, it's the same principle as doing psychotherapy, but it's you're seeing the health beyond the symptomatology, beyond the behavior. You have a secret weapon because you know everybody has that seed, even though they don't see it, even though it may never have been nurtured. It's even after thousands of years in a pyramid, if a seed can come back to life as a plant, a human child is fresh, not too far away from that seed. So when you see that in children, if you're an educator, it's believing in them. Or if you're a coach working with athletes, it's seeing the potential in the athletes, encouraging, educating, training, but believing. I love, I don't know if you guys have Ted Lasso over there where you are.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, but Ted Lasso, I have this big sign in the locker room. It says, believe. Yeah. And it was his philosophy, really, was the three principles. He didn't call it that, but it was really the three principles. And his wisdom and how he worked with the team and how he worked with the fans and everything, it was always very creative and inspired. But the most important thing was that he taught people to believe in the impossible. Against all odds, anything is possible if you believe. And it's not a belief from the intellect. It's a more apt term would be knowing without knowing. It's like I've worked in many avenues. I've worked in healthcare with nurses. One example, I worked with North Memorial Hospital here in Minneapolis, and we were working with mostly the nurses, but the doctors and administrative people too, and teaching the principles and deep listening and all that. Mavis Karn and I. Well, they were on strike. The nurses were on strike, and all the nurses in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul area were on strike for a new contract. But we worked with the team of negotiators, and we just taught them about deep listening, how to listen from the heart, to listen to the administrator, to listen to the other person on the other side of the table with respect and really hearing them. And that team settled their contract before any other hospital in the area. And they got a great settlement, by the way. And it made the other nursing unions angry because they settled so quickly. Because they were holding out. But they ended up getting the best deal of anybody because they respected the administration's point of view. They listened deeply to what they had to say. So, and then because they were listened to, then they listened to the nurses, their point of view. They felt respected. So they came to an insight, a hybrid solution more quickly, more all-inclusive. So it wasn't a win-lose, it was a win-win. So that's just an example. When the mind is operating in its resilient state, it's creative, it's innovative, it's empathetic, it's all-inclusive. And so that was my first experience working in healthcare. And I was later hired by the University of Minnesota Medical School to start a program, the Inner Life of Healers, where we worked with the whole system. And then later, this is all through coincidence, accident. I don't know how the hell this stuff happens. It's everything that's ever happened in my life. I go, how did that happen? But I ended up coaching a guy who was a doctor who ended up getting hired as the CEO of Mayo Clinic, Arizona.
Okay.
And so he loved the principles. And so one of the first things he wanted to do, he could see all the tension between the staff, the nurses and the doctors, and the burnout rate was just accelerating in healthcare. And a major study came out through Mayo Clinic that the rate of burnout for physicians had gone up 20% or something in the last year. So he said, this is how we'll bring the principles into Mayo, is through resiliency training for our physicians. So I said, okay, great. And so Dr. Keith Blevins and I went down there, and we designed a 4-day retreat for the department chairs of each department in Mayo. It was voluntary, but almost all of them came because the CEO, they liked the CEO, so they listened to him. And they brought their wives or husbands. And so their spouses were there at this beautiful retreat center in the desert in Arizona. And so we get there the first night, and we're talking, and all of a sudden this head of surgery stands up, and he's all red-faced, and he says, "This is a bunch of bullshit. Blah, rah, 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 rah. You have to have control over your nurses," and rah, 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 rah. And it was like, oh no, this isn't going well. Now what are we gonna do? I said to Keith, let's take a break. So I had to get my bearings back and Keith's, because there was a lot riding on this. If it didn't go well, we'd lose this contract. And we had just started. So I said, God, I don't know what to do, Keith. What do you think? He says, God, I don't know what to do either. And I said, well, I don't know what to do either, but let me handle it. I'll just go in and I'll talk to this guy. Well, what are you going to say? I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to say. Flying by the seat of my pants. So I go in, and I don't even know what I said to him, but he was arguing with me, and the rest of the room all stood up and said, Tony, shut up. We want to hear what the men have to say. So he didn't hear anything, but it brought all of them together. It was just magical. And then several years later, we trained the whole system, and the burnout rates were dropping. It was an amazing experience. But that's how it works. It's just, I don't know what I'm doing. And that's a good thing. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Everything I think what you have said. And I just want to say, you still look very, very young. You look like in your 30s or 40s. So
well, I'm 75. I just turned 75. I'm telling you, some days I don't feel so young. But young whippersnappers.
So thank you anyway. Yeah. Maybe I just wanted to add that I have been a teacher, and I have been working with kids. And actually, when I came across the principles, which was in 2018, that was the first sphere where I got it so quickly that the kids are fine and I'm fine, and I don't have to strive so hard. And, I don't have to try that. I will know in the moment what to do with them. So, yeah. Exactly what you just said. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah. It's really trusting in your true self.
Yeah.
Your wisdom, your divine intelligence. It's just trusting that and letting go.
Yeah.
And and I forget to, we all do, and that's okay. That's part of the process of discovery. Is you fall down, you get hurt. Oh, I tripped over that. No wonder I fell down. You learn from your errors. As long as you believe, you're okay, and that life is for us to discover deeper and deeper and deeper the true meaning of life. Like Monty Python said, I don't. How are we doing with time?
Fine. We've still got a few minutes. If you want to, it's 3 minutes to 9. How are you doing for time?
I'm good. I did want to mention before we end that I'm going to be coming to Europe in the fall.
Yes, do so, please.
In October, and I'm going to be doing a training for coaches and counselors. I don't know. Maybe you can put up a link on this. I can send you the information. But I would, if it would work out for you, I'd love to see any of you there. I'm so looking forward to the training, the coach training, because we're going to take a small group of 20 people at the most. We're about halfway there, so there's still openings, but it would be great if any of you could come, or if you know anybody who would, because we're really going to go deep into what we're talking about here, and very experientially. We'll do a lot of small practices with coaching each other. And so it won't just be me talking, but it will be us learning by doing and experiencing the power of the principles in helping other people. So it'll focus a lot on our finding our own innate health, discovering that, trusting that, how to really deeply listen to other people to hear their issue or their wisdom, or your wisdom will guide you to see how to uniquely help each person, and then having trust and courage to say what comes into your mind through this wisdom. So it's really it just takes all the heavy lifting out of coaching and counseling, and allows it to be this dance, this creative, loving dance of discovery. And I swear I learn as much from my sessions as my clients learn. So that's a cool thing. You get paid to learn, you know.
It's amazing.
Sure, totally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yesterday I had a meeting and I was talking to someone, and I learned from that too, because I was talking to this lady, and I suddenly realized, I had a lesson last Sunday. I was going around sailing with my sister and her friend, and at some stage I slipped on the boat, and I was hanging onto the boat. And then my sister's friend came to me. Why did you just let that go? You've already been in the water, so why did you just let it go? Because you can't hoist yourself up anymore. So let's go. I said, yeah, of course, makes absolute sense. So I dropped. That was one of those little lessons. I said, oh yeah, of course.
Yeah,
silly me.
Yeah, but you get afraid and you hang on.
Yeah, and you think, I have to control this. I have to do something about this. No, you don't. Just let go.
Yeah.
And
My wife is a poet and an artist, and she wrote her first poem that she ever wrote was on the back of a book of matches. So it was very short, and it just said, "There are no mistakes, only the revelation of the inner self."
Yeah, and that's so true.
Yeah, it's so good, because I always thought if I made a mistake as a kid, I was a failure. I was stupid. I sure wish my teacher had been like Bearden there, and was more encouraging. But the nuns, the Catholic nuns, they were pretty strict.
Oh yes, we know them here in the Netherlands as well. Yeah. Quite a few who have experiences with that. I haven't. Luckily, I've been lucky.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it was a wonderful session. If that's okay with the others, if there's no more questions, I don't see any raised hands, so I'm trusting.
Inge, we got Inge there. Inge, is that how you say your name?
Inige. Oh,
Inge.
Okay, go ahead, Inige.
Oh no, I just saw her light was on. I could see her face.
Okay.
Don't have a question, but I love it. Thank you.
Okay, glad that you could all come. And maybe you could put a link up to my website if people want to hear other I've done lots of podcasts and videos and lots of free materials on my website. If anybody is interested, you feel free to take advantage of that.
Yeah. We'll add the link to your website to the publication wheels. We'll start up. So.
And there be information there about the training and
of course
in Spain as well.
Yeah, and what I'll send you a copy of this.
That would be great. I'd love to put it up on my website. That'd be great.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time and
Thank
your
you
being here.
Yeah. I'm glad I got connected with you. I didn't have a link for a while there, and I didn't know if we were going to do this.
We managed it in the end.
We did, yeah.
So
Yeah.
mind
Yeah.
was okay with it, probably.
Everything worked out.
Yeah, it worked out, and it
Yeah.
was amazing session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Best
Joe.
of luck to all of you.
Best of luck.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you,
Yeah,
Joe. And
bye-bye.
thank you, Sweer.
Bye bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.